Good evening, everybody. Tonight's shir I titled Elul and the two light bulb jokes. A rather facetious title. I don't know if anybody remembers light bulb jokes. Maybe I'm talking to an audience. That's always the problem when you get a little bit older. Your cultural references kind of go over the head of your audience. So, but anybody who's out there who actually remembers light bulb jokes, the format of a light bulb joke went something like this: how many does it take to change a light bulb? So one of my favorite light bulb jokes was, how many West Coast psychotherapists does it take to change a light bulb? And the answer is only one, but the light bulb has really got to want to change. Now, it's a joke, not a great joke, but I think it's very much like Elul. One of the problems of tshuva is, do we really want to change? It's difficult for a person to believe. I mean, of course we all know we're not doing exactly what we're supposed to do, but hey, we're not really that bad, we're not really doing, I'm okay. I'm no worse than most people, I'm turning up to daven and I'm doing most things. It's very difficult for us to believe that we're actually doing things that really need changing. Maybe superficially we could see, yeah, maybe, but we don't really give these things tremendous importance. The reason is because of something which psychologists call cognitive dissonance. Cognitive dissonance posits that a person likes to have assonance between his beliefs and his behavior. Meaning, in our particular context, I believe that I'm a good person, and therefore, by de facto, because I believe I'm a good person, the things that I do are by definition good. Classic example is a person who buys a car, and he goes into the showroom. This car looks great, beautiful. He pays for it. He takes out the showroom. He's riding a wild set of wheels at an easy pace down the highway. And then he suddenly takes the car a little bit over 70 miles an hour, gets out on the open road, and he realizes things, although it looked great in town and it handled okay, but now it's about as comfortable as a board. So now he's got a problem. He believes that he bought a good car, and he also believes that a good car means that at 70 miles an hour plus it should still be comfortable. So a dissonance now exists between his belief that his car is a good car and the fact that his car is not performing over 70 miles an hour the way that he would want the car to do. So now he has one of two options. He can either play down the dissonant belief, which is that a good car should handle well over 70 miles an hour, and say to himself, yeah, okay, it's not really important because, how often do I go out of town, and he can play down the dissonant belief. Or he can say, no, hey, I bought a lemon, I'm going to change the car. Now, when it comes to ourselves, changing the car is much more difficult than playing down the dissonant belief, meaning, because I'm a good person, therefore what I do is good, and therefore it's very difficult, depending on the way, the sort of person you are, to really be honest with yourself and think about what it is that I can do, what I should be doing, to go through that kind of self-examination, to make a cheshbon nefesh, which is what a person should really do. You should take some time, maybe just before you go to sleep at night, and replay the day. Hit the day on rewind. From the moment you got up, what did I do that was good? What did I do that wasn't so good? What did I do that I would like to strengthen? What did I feel that was encouraging, empowering? What did I feel that made me feel weaker? What did I feel that increased my emunah? What did I feel that decreased my emunah? As we mentioned before, emunah isn't like a fixed thing, like an iceberg or a rock or a mountain. It's not a question of, I believe in God. Emunah is a midah. Emunah is a character trait. And it can be strengthened or weakened. For example, we've said this many times in the past, take the example of ka'as, anger. Now, a person intellectually can believe that to be a ka'ason, an angry person, is an extremely bad thing. But that person will stay an angry person to the end of his days until he works on that midah. Similarly, emunah is not something fixed. A person can increase his emunah, he can become a bigger ma'amin, or he can, not necessarily himself, but things can affect his emunah to bring him lower and upper. We're all constantly on a scale, from the greatest Jew to the smallest, of our levels of our belief and our trust in the Kodesh Baruch Hu. And one of the avodas of Elul, as I said many times, the drasha, Ani ledodi, uledodi li, Rosh Hashanah Elul, Aleph Lamed Vav Lamed Elul. I am to my beloved, and my beloved is to me. Kamayim ponim leponim. As water is, as a reflection is in the water, so Hashem will react to us, will behave towards us. Ani ledodi. If we are mechazik in Amunah in the month of Elul, the Dodi Li, then a Kodesh Baruch Hu will show more and more to us of Himself, so to speak. He will mechazik us. Kaveh al Hashem, v'chazek v'ametz limecha v'kaveh al Hashem. The Kaveh al Hashem, the hoping in Hashem, it says that twice in that verse. So the hoping in Hashem, Kaveh al Hashem, is stronger once a person is mechazek. He strengthens himself. He does things which are proactive in his emunah. How does one do this? Well, there are two ways that a person there are two approaches really to Rosh Hashanah. Rosh Hashanah, maybe we should start a little by discussing Rosh Hashanah. Rosh Hashanah is what we're coming up to. Elul, the whole work of Elul, is to get to Rosh Hashanah in the right frame of mind, in the right frame of It just struck me recently that when I was seeing some news clips of the recent coronation of His Majesty King Charles III of England, that one of my earliest memories, and to be honest, I was very young at the time, but I think I remember seeing the coronation of Queen Elizabeth II. From what I remember, this was one of the earliest broadcasts on television after the war. And there was television before the war in America, certainly, but in England, it started to come in 1953 was her coronation. And I remember, what I seem to remember was this grey, murky fishbowl, sort of not even black and white, so different shades of grey, which you could peer into. And we watched this procession in the Abbey, going up and down, and the pomp and the circumstance and the ceremony and the Malchus. Gemara says that a person should always run to see a king of flesh and blood, so you'll understand the difference when Melech HaMashiach comes. And a person who's seen, and I think actually the British are quite good at doing this, they're very good at pageantry. It struck me how much, from seeing, the films and that, the feeling of the Malchus that we had even on that little grey fishbowl, how much things have changed since her coronation and King Charles's coronation. The Malchus has shrunk. It's smaller. Not even everybody's so convinced that there should be a king. I mean, of course, there were always dissidents, but the amount of people who believe that the monarchy is an overpaid, anachronistic institution is certainly more than it was in the time of Queen Elizabeth. Queen Elizabeth, when she went up to the throne, she had still dominions. There was dominions in a commonwealth, and now pretty much, the the British Empire, what's left of it is no longer. The power of kings, the power of the king in England has shrunk. And also, if you think of it, the power of kings generally has diminished. Revolving writes that the only reason that the HaKadosh Baruch Hu created kings of flesh and blood is that we should have, that man should have, the most distant scintilla, the most distant echo, the most distant glimmer of the Melech Malchei Amlochim, of the King of Kings. There should be some kind of physical representation on the smallest, minuscule level of what kingship is. What is Malchus? What is Malchus Shemaim? And therefore, says Ralph Bowlby, concomitantly as the world generally turned away from a belief in a God, so concomitantly the power of kings shrunk. Mida keneged mida. The less mankind believed in God, the less Hashem provided man with an ever-present reminder of what kingship was. The smaller the kings became, until pretty much now almost everywhere in the world such monarchies as remain are constitutional monarchies. And in point of fact, I was thinking one of the few places where the king is still a king. If you remember reading Lewis Carroll, and what was it, Alice in Wonderland, off with his head. There are very few countries now where the king can go off with his head. Probably one of the only places in the world is in the Arab countries. There, I think still, some of the kings over there retain the ability of life and death. And interestingly enough, we could say that probably the Arabs, the Ishmaelim, have a very, very strong emunah. And one can criticize them for many things, but being lacking in emunah is not one of the things one can accuse them of. So I would suggest maybe that concomitantly, because they, so to speak, preserved their power of emunah in a God, so similarly HaKadosh Baruch Hu did not diminish the power of their kings. But we live in a world where the king has become very, very small now. Very difficult for us to focus on on the idea of the kingship of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. In fact, in England, the new year, let's turn now to Rosh Hashanah. Rosh Hashanah is the day where we're Mamlech HaKadosh Baruch Hu, we crown the king. Where is the crown that is big enough to put on the head of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Kaviyachol? What does it mean that we crown Hashem? How do we crown Hashem? And also, it's interesting that if you think about it, that Rosh Hashanah is really not the date of the creation of the world. That happened 5 days before. Rosh Hashanah, Echad Tishrei, was the date that Adam HaRishon was born. So we have the creation of the world, the creation of man, and Rosh Hashanah, which is a Yom Hadin, a day of judgment, where the whole world, so to speak, is judged. Not so to speak, the whole world is judged. What is the creation of man, the birthday of Adam HaRishon, and got to do with din, with judgment? I mean, we take these things as being so axiomatic that it's the birthday of Adam HaRishon, and it's also Yom Adin, that we don't really ask ourselves what is the connection. But if you think about it, what is the connection? And it is a Yom Adin. I mean, in Rosh Hashanah, the beginning of the year, I mean, in England, certainly the beginning of the year is marked by people getting seriously drunk and jumping into fountains and making complete fools of themselves. And yet, Klal Yisrael, Havdil, stand at attention, in tittering, as they say in Yiddish, in fear and trembling. Mi yichyeh, mi yomus, who will live, who will die, who will wander, who will be at peace, who will yitaref, who will be mashuga, It's a very serious day. Very unlike the way the rest of the world understands the new year. So what is this idea of din, this very seriousness of din? What is that connected to the birthday of Adam HaRishon? So maybe we could understand it in the following way. If you look in the first chapter, in the first chapters of Bereshis, when it describes the creation of man, The Torah says, Na'aseh Odam. Na'aseh Odam. Let us make man. Now, Chazal teach us this shows the anvanusa shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the humility of Hashem, that he, so to speak, took counsel with the Pamalia Shel Mala, his heavenly court. He consulted with them. Of course, these are mystical concepts that are beyond our conception. But in some way that Hashem, so to speak, took counsel about the creation of man. And that was why it says in the plural, Na'aseh Odam, let us make man. Now the Medrash darshans Na'aseh Odam, because those letters, Na'aseh, Nun, Ayin, Sin, Hey, could also be punctuated for it to say not Na'aseh Adam, but Na'asa Adam, which means man is created. The Medrash tells us that this conversation, so to speak, this consultation that HaKadosh Baruch Hu had with the Pamalia Shemalia went as follows. Na'aseh Adam, let's make man. The different midot spoke up. The midah of emes, of truth, said, Al Yabareh, don't create man. Why? He's Maleh Sheker, Maleh Shkarim, full of lies. Not just that he can lie, that is, he's Maleh Shkarim, he is full of deceit. And the midah of tzedek, of justice, said, Yabareh, create man. Why? Because man is capable of tzedek, of being fair. And so it was that all of the midot in Shemayim, so to speak, threw in their particular deyot, their opinions. Shall we make man? Shall we not make man? Shall we make man? Shall we not make man? Until finally, with those same words, Na'aseh Adam, punctuated differently, HaKadosh Baruch Hu said, Na'asa Adam. Man has already been created. Meaning that man, whether man should be created or not, the jury never returned its verdict. Man was created in the middle of an enormous cosmic question mark. The jury was still out. Which means that every Rosh Hashanah, each one of us returns to that same question. Was it worth creating Bishvili Nivra Olam? The world was created for me. Was it worth it? Every descendant of Adam is still in the dock for that primordial question, that the creation, the whole creation was nisod, was placed into this background of an eternal, of a, how do you say, a cosmic question mark. Should man be created, yes or no? And each one of us, as we pass in front of a Kodesh Baruch Hu, like sheep, have to answer that question. And how do we answer that question? How are we matzdik ourselves? How do we justify ourselves? How do we emerge from this din successfully? How do we vindicate ourselves? And the answer, of course, as we know, is the shofar. We blow the shofar. How does the shofar vindicate us? How does the shofar work? Okay, I'm not going to say, in all its deep, but how does at least a basic understanding of what is the power of the shofar? It says, Vayipach ba'apov, right at the beginning of Bereshis, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu yipach ba'apov, he blew into the nostrils of man, V'haya la'odam nefesh chaya, and man became a living spirit. Says the Targum Onkelos, nefesh chayim ruach mamalala, a speaking spirit. The essence of the life that was given to us is enthroned, is emplaced in us as speech. Vayipach ba'apav, Hashem breathed into us a nefesh chaim, a living soul. V'haya la'odam, so vayipach ba'av nefesh chaim, vayipach ba'apav. Chumash, please. Thank you. Vayipach ba'apov. Vayipach ba'apov nishmas chayim. Vayhi ha'odam lenefesh chaya. And Hashem breathed into his nostrils a nishmas chayim, a soul of life. Vayhi ha'odam lenefesh chaya. And man was a nefesh chayim, a living being. As I said, the Targum Onkelos says, ruach mamalala, a speaking spirit. And what does that speaking spirit say? Excuse me. It says in Mizmor Shir Yom HaShabbos, Lagid baboker chastecha ve'emunosecha baleilos. That we have to say, we have to speak out the chastei Hashem, Lagid baboker chasdecha, u Lagid baboker chastecha ve'emunosecha baleilos, and your faithfulness at night. Baleilos. What is the difference between these two? There are two kinds of speech. There's a speech, so to speak, vayipach, vayigid, that we have to say out. Try and stay with me here. There's a speech of the day. There's a speech of light. There's a kind of communication. Vayigid baboker. The boker is the time where everything is clear. A time of clarity where everything can be seen. Ve'emunoscha baleilos. And there is a speech of the night, which is the speech of emunah. Most things in existence, objects, ideas, can be discussed, can be argued about, can be extrapolated. There's one part of a person's, I don't want to use the word knowledge, but I have to use the word knowledge, which does not work through the wheels of intellect at all. It is a piece of knowledge, if you want to call it that, an awareness that is beyond all intellect, is incommunicable to anybody else, that everybody knows it, nobody can contradict it. That is the knowledge of my own existence. The fact that I exist, the knowledge, the certainty of my own existence, is not something that I arrive through some kind of intellectual, am I here? And then I answer the question, yes, I am. It's not something nobody can argue, nobody can convince me that I'm not here. We're not playing the sort of games you played, in university, well, maybe we're not here. Everybody, that knowledge is something which is beyond every other kind of knowledge. It's unassailable. And the knowledge of my own existence with regard to myself is something that you cannot communicate to anybody else. Everybody has their own knowledge of the certainty of their own existence, but what that is, we can't share with anybody else. That is the emunas chabaleilos. That is what Hashem breathed into us. Vayipach ba'apov. Why does it take place at night? Why is that emunah? When everything is removed from a person, he's left with himself, who he is, who I am. That's why it says the Rishoyim in the darkness, Yidom, I forget the exact pasuk, they will be silent. They will have nothing to say. A person intuitively understands the truth of his own existence. If you take away, the word in Hebrew for darkness is choshech. Choshech is the same root as it says in the pasuk by Yitzchak, Avram Avinu says that Hashem says to Avram Avinu, "V'lo chasachta es bincha es yichidecha." You have not withheld from me. Lo hasachta. Choshech, lo chasachta. Choshech is the withdrawal, with the removal of everything else except, and that's what happens if you think. I remember there was experiments they did in the 60s of putting people in flotation tanks and taking away all outside stimuli to the point where a person is left with himself. That voice inside a person, the sense of my own existence, that I, that Ani, is what Hashem breathed into us. That is the Ruach Mamalana. That is the speaking spirit. That is what that I is saying. That is what an Irish poet once called the inarticulate speech of the heart. The speech which has no words. The inarticulate cry, which is the shofar, is the expression of our emunah, of at the deepest level, our understanding that my existence is what Hashem breathed into me. Emunah, real emunah, it says when Klal Yisrael was standing at Har Sinai, the first word of the Ten Commandments, Anochi, is a notricon, is I forget the word in Hebrew, in English, where you take the first letters of a sentence, you make a word out of it. Anochi stands for Ana Nafshis Ksavis Yahavis. Anochi, I, says Hashem, have written myself, Ksavis, and I've given myself over in the Torah. At Har Sinai, the Jewish people achieved a level of awareness, that's really what happened there, of that their deepest existence, their deepest sense of their own I, was none other than emunah in the Kodesh Baruch Hu. Twice a day when a person says Shema, and he says Hashem Echad, he's supposed to think for a split second, Ein od milvado. Now you're not allowed to do this for more than a split second. When a person says Ein od milvado, it doesn't mean there's only one God in the world. It means that nothing exists except for God. Nothing. So then where am I? Who's saying the Shema? Meaning at that moment, that supernal moment of absolute achdus, Hashem Echad, I surrender the deepest sense of my own certainty of my own existence into the certainty of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. I take my deepest sense of my own I and I say, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, my I is none other than you expressing yourself in your world. I'm Moisa Nefesh. I give over that deepest sense and I give it to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And that's the shofar. That is how we stand in judgment. We return to Hashem through our breath, that same Ruach Memalala, that speaking spirit, implanted into us. That chelek melokah milamal, that portion of God from above, that godly spark, however you want to call it, that knowledge which is uncontrovertible, which goes beyond all intellect. That's emunah. And with that unshakable emunah, that's how we stand in front of HaKadosh Baruch Hu at Har Sinai. And that's how we stand on Rosh Hashanah. It's not by coincidence that at Har Sinai also the shofar blew. The shofar is the expression of that deepest sense of a person's own self-awareness, of the knowledge of his own existence and the surrender of that existence to the existence of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That's what we're trying to achieve. maybe we'll just touch on maybe a slightly less deep idea, but a more practical idea. As we said, there are two ways at the beginning of the shir. The light bulb's really going to want to change. There are two ways that a person can change. One is he can make a list, if he's honest with himself, of all the things he needs to change. As I said, that's very difficult, because a person believes that what he does is correct. And he can work on, he can go through the Shulchan Aruch and say, I'm not doing this properly, I'm not doing this properly, I'm not doing this properly. And of course a person needs to do that. And make Kabbalahs, acceptances upon himself to change. The problem is, I think each one of us has found that doing this is actually not very effective. I don't know about you, but I know every Rosh Hashanah, every Yom Kippur, I come out, I used to anyway, come out. I'll tell you a story about my Rebbe. When he first went to yeshiva, says the first Rosh Hashanah, he had 6 pages of Kabbalahs, of things that he was going to change, 6 pages. The next year there were 4, the year after that there were 2, the year after that was 1, the year after that, and then there was none. Kabbalahs, unless they're very small and doable, generally don't stick. Revolving once gave an example of he was back in the 73 war, in the Yom Kippur War, at the end of the war, when the Israeli army was already in Africa, in Egypt, surrounded the 3rd Egyptian army, and they flew Revolvi out to give some chizuk to the troops. So of course there are no commercial airliners plowing that particular route, so they put him in the back seat of a jet fighter. And he's in the back seat of this jet fighter, and as they go over the Suez Canal, the plane suddenly does this, boom! It goes to about 50 feet off the dirt and goes very, very fast. And Revolvi gets very, very frightened. He says to the pilot, is the plane okay? So the fighter pilot says, fine, don't worry. I'm just getting underneath the enemy radar. And Revolvi took a mussar from that. If you want to fight the Yetzer Hara, you have to get under his radar. Meaning, a person stands there on Yom Kippur, Rosh Hashanah, he goes, I'm never going to speak Lashon Hara again. I'm never going to look where I shouldn't look. I'm never going to, some really like big thing, the Yetzer Hara stands there and he's laughing his head off. He sees you coming out of the sky, boom, 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 shoots you down, no problem. No problem. But if you say, you know something, once a week, Sunday breakfast, I'm going to bench with a siddur. The Yetzer Hara will let you do things which are very small. And of course, any improvement has to be very small, and it has to be oft repeated. Then it makes an effect on you. It has to be something doable, quantifiable, limited, because when you do something limited, its effects are unlimited. It spreads out into the whole of the rest of your life. I am now a person who now benches every Sunday morning with a siddur. As I said, there are 2 ways. One is to make a list of all the things you're doing wrong and all the Kabbalahs, and I'm saying that it's very difficult to really fix yourself that way, but I do think obviously that a person should try and at least, and it can have an amazing effect if it's something you can do on a constant basis and it's not too difficult. The other way, we really run out of time, so maybe we'll leave this till next week to talk about it. The other way, let me just give you what I've been talking about is really, the one way we can go about things is to be frightened, to be scared. And Yira is a very difficult thing. We're in a generation where everybody thinks the Kadosh Baruch Hu is a nice Kadosh Baruch Hu, he's going to let me off. And we don't like the idea of fear. Fear is very non-PC. The story goes that before the war in Europe, when they announced Rosh Chodesh Elul b'yom shlishi, whatever it was, you could hear a dull thud in the ladies' gallery of the ladies fainting from fear. In my shul, this didn't happen this last week. I'm not sure it happened in any shuls. We're not comfortable with Yira. It's something which we're not happy with. It's difficult for us. My Rebbe said that when he used to drive in America, he once pulled up next to a traffic cop at the traffic light, the red light, and he looked at the traffic cop looked at him and he smiled. And then for no reason, he says to this day, he has no idea why he does it. And they're sitting at this red light. He puts his foot on the accelerator and drives through this red light. Why? Doesn't know. So, the cop overtakes him and pulls him and says, Rabbi, I'm going to have to give you a ticket. So he gives him a ticket. He's got a court summons to appear in court in 2 weeks' time. It's just before Rosh Hashanah. And for the next 2 weeks, he is thinking to himself, if the judge says this, I'm going to say that. And if he says that, I'm going to say this. And he thinks to himself, I'm spending all of this time thinking about what I'm going to say. What am I going to say on Rosh Hashanah? It's difficult for us to instill in ourselves. For a lousy $20, $50 ticket, a person goes backwards and forwards. But when it comes to mi yicheh mi yomus, it's very difficult. It's very difficult to achieve that level. And the reason is, and I say again, we'll carry on with this next week, is that a Kadosh Baruch Hu has taken fear out of the world when it comes to Yiras Shamayim. He wants us to have Yiras Shamayim, but we have to work for it. Because if you think about it, the idea of being an agnostic is really not an intellectually honest position. What does an agnostic say? I'm not sure. I'm not sure. Okay. So there are three possible scenarios. There's the scenario that there's no schar v'onish, there's no HaKadosh Baruch Hu, chas v'chalila, or there is. Now, on the one side, let's say there isn't, God forbid. There isn't. So you know something, what happens if you don't keep anything of the Torah? Nothing. You go upstairs, well, there's no upstairs. Or let's say there is no Kadosh Baruch Hu, chas v'chalila, but you keep everything. You keep the Torah. So what happens? Nothing. But so what? Okay, maybe you spent a bit more money on buying kosher food, but at least you probably had a wife who was, loyal and faithful to you, and children who didn't end up as drug addicts. It's not the end of the world to be a religious Jew, even for Olam Hazeh. Now let's go on the other side. So let's say there is a Kodesh Baruch Hu. There's a Kodesh Baruch Hu. So now what happens if you keep the Torah? Fine. If you don't keep the Torah, so then you're in big trouble. So if you think about it, if you're not sure, if you're an agnostic, intellectually, honestly, you should keep it because just in case, right? It's not an intellectually honest position. I remember a few years ago, many years ago now actually, the Gerber baby food recalled some astronomical number of baby food bottles because some Meshuggah had put some glass or some poison or something in one of them. 50, 100, 150, a million, whatever it was, some astronomical number. Why? Because when a person is faced with a distant possibility, he'll go to enormous steps to protect himself if it's something which is potentially fatal. Now, this is a potentially fatal situation. So if you're agnostic, why don't you say, well, and there was a cartoon in Ma'ariv many years ago, and there was the first bubble of this cartoon was this guy, this Chiloni guy, and he falls asleep, right? And so the sleep dream comes out of his head, and he imagines he's upstairs in Shemayim, And there's a Beis Shemayim, of course, everybody got these black cats along, curly payas. And they said to him, why didn't you keep Shabbos? You knew there was a thing called Shabbos. Why didn't you keep kashrus? You know there's things called kashrus. So you like this sweat sport, like spurting off his forehead in the dream. And the last frame is he wakes up and he goes, maybe they're right. Maybe they're right. Why doesn't an agnostic think that? And the answer is because HaKadosh Baruch Hu has taken out of the world Yiras Shamayim as a natural response. A person has to work for Yiras Shamayim. And that's why it's very difficult for us. I'll end with this story. There was a younger man, somebody, a Kollel student, who was finding it very, very difficult to daven. You know, we all know what that's like on Rosh Hashanah. Sometimes things distract us. And he came out when they have Kiddush, you know, just before Musaf, Kiyas. And his wife and his children came down from the ladies' gallery. And he suddenly was struck with this thought. Their lives are dependent on me. They're depending on me. And he went back inside and he davened as though he was standing at the Pischo Shel Gehinnom, as though he was standing at the entrance of hell. A person needs to awaken himself. Rav Yisrael Salanter said he used to go and stand to see a court case. Before Rosh Hashanah, he used to go to a secular court in the gallery. He used to say, this is where the judge is, this is the judge, this is the jury, this is the defendant, to have in his mind an idea. It's very difficult. Yiras Shamayim, as I say, is something. My Rebbe told me that his grandmother, when he became bar mitzvah, of course she said it to him in Yiddish, told him what she believed a Jewish boy should be told on his bar mitzvah. She said to him, you should know, in the Jena Welt, in the world, the next world, they hit you with iron bars. That's not something that we tell bar mitzvah boys anymore. The idea of physical punishment is very, very difficult for us to really get our heads around. And the reason is because the Kadosh Baruch Hu removed that fear when it comes to Yiras Shamayim. We have to work on that Yiras Shamayim. That is one way, that's the way of Yira, that a person should try and inculcate in himself these days. Days of Elul. Second, you didn't ask what the second light bulb joke is. The second light bulb joke is the two it's not really a light bulb joke. Maybe we'll leave it for next week. I'll leave you on the threshold. Anyway, next week what we're going to do, we're going to talk about the other approach, which is the approach of Ahava, which is bringing Hashem into our lives in such a way that we don't change the actions from the outside. We change our worldview so that Mela, we become different people. I'll go into that in more detail next week. Yeah.
Why can't it be said that agnostic position is intellectually honest? I admit, as an agnostic would say, I admit there's a chance that Hashem and Torah is true, but the possibility of the chance isn't worth the...
Yeah, but the whole point I want to say is when a person has even the most distant fear of something that might happen, he'll go to extraordinary lengths to protect himself. That's the case of the Gerber baby food. A person will go to enormous lengths to make sure that he doesn't get hurt. Why doesn't an agnostic say, well, I might get hurt, you know, maybe the Torah is true, so why don't I just keep it just because maybe it is true? People don't say that. Agnostic means, no, I'm not sure, so I won't keep it. It's not logical. That was the point. Seder.